Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. And today's guest expert is Hilary Grosskopf. Hilary is a leadership strategist, writer, yoga teacher, and the founder of Awake Leadership Solutions. She helps leaders build the teams of their dreams, reach their objectives, and strengthen their leadership skills. She is the author of Awake Leadership, a system for leading with clarity and creativity, and a second book, Awake Ethics, a system for aligning your actions with your core intentions. Hilary, it's so great to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
Hi, Jake. I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Well, before we jump into this whole idea of awake leadership, tell us a little bit about you. What we missed by way of bio intro?
Yeah, so you got all the great details there about who I am right now and all I'm working on. So I am located up in the Bay Area, and I am a leadership strategist and coach. I also am a writer and an author, so I have my own publication on medium.com. And as you mentioned, I've written 2 guidebooks for leaders. And I also give workshops actually based on my books as well for organizations, for schools, and for individuals and teams. And finally, as you also mentioned, I'm a yoga teacher. So I have a lot of training in the yoga space as well that we can get into in how that relates to my books and my leadership approach as well.
Let's do that. That sounds like a great idea. Yoga, how it relates to your leadership approach.
Yeah. So when I was in school, I went to school on the East Coast at the University of Pennsylvania. And by education, I'm actually an engineer. I'm a systems engineer. So I learned electrical engineering and network optimization and telecommunications in school. And after school, I went into work in the retail space for Urban Outfitters and Anthropologie. And I really enjoyed that at work. But during school, actually, if we go back a little bit, engineering was pretty intense for me. I had come from an all-girls high school outside of Philadelphia, and going into the Penn environment that was co-ed and engineering was very intense and competitive, in that environment. Yeah, I was under a lot of pressure and kind of feeling the stress. And just by, way of the internet, Groupon, and an email, I found 5 classes for $25 for yoga. And I decided to try it. Yeah, I had never done yoga before. And I was like, it's a reason to get off campus, do something different, exercise on the weekend. So I walked over the bridge to Center City and started doing yoga. And the first class, there was just this sense of peace and calm and such a different feeling, the studio vibe and environment than what I had been immersed in school in that very competitive Ivy League environment. And so sort of immediately I was immersed in this new environment and wanted to keep going back. So I kept going back to yoga classes. And long story short, I ended up getting my 200-hour, the first training for yoga teaching about 2 years later. And then now I have my 500-hour yoga teacher training from out here in San Francisco in Vinyasa yoga and also yoga therapeutics. And so I sort of fell in love with yoga. And also while I was at Urban working after school, I really found that the balance between leading a team or being part of a team in the business environment and having that yoga practice and that spiritual connection outside of the work environment was just so vital for both my work-life balance at the time and also my leadership practice. So I was very inspired by my yoga practice as well as yoga philosophy to write my Awake Leadership book, actually, for how I sort of found that combination of yoga and work life.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit. So your company is called Awake Leadership Solutions. This awake theme is obviously, it's part of the titles of your book. It's the title of your company. Tell me a little bit about how you came up with this idea of awake, and then where you saw a need in the business book environment to come up with these 2 ideas of awake leadership and awake ethics.
So kind of continuing the story, while I was at Urban, I loved it. I loved it there. It was such a creative company. The retail environment was great, even working in supply chain and logistics. But I ended up moving out to California and taking a new job at Restoration Hardware. And because of some leadership challenges at Urban, and I just needed to, grow in my career and move on. And so I came out here to California, started working at Restoration Hardware, and shortly I saw that there was a trend, right? They also had some leadership challenges, and not necessarily just lack of mindful leadership or kindness, which is very prevalent in the business space, but also lack of leadership techniques and just these environments that I felt really needed an infusion of yoga, a little bit more balance in terms of the philosophy and spiritual teachings that yoga has. And I knew, people in the business environment weren't going to be doing yoga poses in the office at their desk or chanting necessarily, but there's a lot of pieces of yoga philosophy, which I'll talk about how this relates to the structure of the book, that I found could be brought into the very structured, kind of intense, pressurized, competitive business space to really more motivate and engage team members. So getting to the Awake name, back in 2016, while I was working for Restoration Hardware, I came across through one of my yoga teachers the movie Awake, which is about Yogananda, who is a famous yogi who came from India to California in the early 1900s and actually is known for bringing yoga, or a specific style of yoga at least, to the West. And he did a lot of yoga, mostly yoga philosophy teaching in California, and is known as the guy who really brought yoga to the West, and is sort of why California is known as a kind of yoga center in the United States, where a lot of yoga originated in the US.
Yeah.
So that awake word actually comes from his book and the book about him and the movie. And that's where I got the awake word, because I really am combining with my book yoga philosophy and modern leadership in business.
Yeah, I love this idea. And when I hear the word awake, or when I see it, and as we were preparing for this episode, looking at your books, awake to me, I think there's a lot of people in leadership, there's a lot of people in businesses, a lot of followers of companies that are kind of asleep at the wheel. And I don't mean they're laying in bed with their eyes closed, but they're going through the routine, they're going through the day-to-day without really intention. And to me, I look at this word awake, and it tells me that I need to be intentional about leadership. I need to be intentional about ethics. I need to be intentional about clarity and creativity. The levels of success that I'm trying to achieve in my life all take this certain need for intentionality. And so awake to me is this realization aspect, or this eye-opening to what is going out there. And so is that kind of the framework of where you started the writing of this book?
Yes, definitely. From the yoga perspective, awake definitely means being in alignment. And this might sound high level, but I'll definitely explain. It means really being in alignment with your truth, or with your purpose, right? And that can actually translate down to what you do as a career, right? What is your intention that you do as a career? Are you going through the motions just to make money, just to get by? But in yoga, a lot of the philosophy prompts us to ask, really, what is the point of my life? Like, why am I here, right? Is it just to make money? Is it just to get by? Is it just to win? Is it just to have 10 cars? And is that really going to make me happy? Or is doing something impactful and meaningful and making genuine connections with other people that are like-minded and enjoying our day-to-day with each other and engaging with each other and accomplishing things as a team that we wouldn't have been able to do together? Is that really what I want to experience, and will really make my life fuller by making other people's lives fuller, right? So it's all integrated. Yoga is a lot about integration and connectedness. And this word awake is a way of going about your life, or going about your leadership fully aligned with your own intention. So not just following someone else or being reactive in doing what someone else is telling you to do, but really being intentional and seeing clearly and having clarity around why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing it, and the impacts that it has on yourself and on others and on the world.
And I think when you ask people in a business setting, is it important to have clarity? Is it important to align, be in alignment with your beliefs, your passions, with the things that you're desiring, your values? I think people will say yes. And then if you follow up that with a question of, okay, how do you do that? Or what does that mean? How do we go a little deeper? I think that's where people get tripped up. And so as you were putting together Awake Leadership, you came up with these 7 vitals for leadership success. And that's kind of the framework of the book that you use. And so I want to kind of walk through these a little bit, at least from a high level point of view of what these 7 vitals are so that we can start to become in alignment with, or awake, if you will, in what our passion, our creativity, our clarity, all of that stuff is.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great point. And I think definitely along the way for a lot of us, whether it's in school or in our early career or pressure from our family or just life catches up with us, as we grow up, I think we really lose connection with what our interests are or what the impacts are that we want to make, right? Like when you're going through the day to day and you are under the pressure of getting the work done or getting a job or whatever it is, I think it's actually sometimes a privilege to be able to step back and say, why am I really doing this? What do I really want to be doing to make an impact on the world that I want to make? But I think there's some exercises in my book that I'll talk about too that kind of show that even the busiest leaders, you really can make and should make 10, 15, 20 minutes for some of these exercises I give that are more about observation before taking action. That's a lot of the awake. The awake approach also is stepping back and seeing clearly before then taking action, not just action, which a lot of people are. We get addicted to the action and just keep taking action without stepping back, seeing clearly, then taking action, stepping back, seeing clearly, then taking action. So to get to your question about the 7 vitals, yes, I think this book's a little bit different because it comes from a bit more of a spiritual approach to leadership. But as I saw with my team, I used this system that I created in these exercises, and it really did work. We became more productive. The team became more motivated and engaged, and we actually sustained as a team through a period of turmoil within the company where a lot of team members left, a lot of people were laid off. We sustained as a team and actually made progress, and other leaders started coming to me and asking, oh, what are you doing with your team to keep them so engaged and you have such a positive vibe and so productive? So it really did work. And the 7 vitals of the system are vision, support, structure, tools, context, inspiration, and freedom. And so there's 7 vitals. And if you see on the cover of the book, it really covers the spectrum of leadership. So there's the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and pink. And why they are those 7 colors or how I represent the vitals come from yoga philosophy, of course. So you may have heard of the chakra system. A lot of people have heard of the chakra system and think it's sort of this woo-woo system if you haven't studied yoga for, align your chakras, live a better life and be enlightened. But if you study the chakra system actually scientifically and even from more of a theoretical perspective, it's pretty powerful in that really the chakra system are like wheels of energy throughout your body, all the way from, your low belly, all the way to the crown of your head, that represent different areas of your body, but also these areas of your body represent different areas of your life. So really what the chakra system says is if one of these 7 areas are off, right, like out of alignment, there's areas of your life that you may have blind spots or that may be out of alignment. So when you study these 7 different chakras in yoga philosophy, it's really a system for finding balance or alignment in your life. And similarly, I found that these 7 vitals for leaders are the 7 vitals for balancing or aligning your leadership from the foundation all the way up to inspiration and freedom.
Now, is there a starting point? I mean, is it a progression, or is this just something that's kind of almost like spokes on a wheel that each one needs to be balanced in order for your whole self to be kind of in alignment?
Great question. So it definitely starts with vision, the red vital. And that is the first one because you start from, like in yoga, the first chakra is like having the resources you need, like having a home and your family being safe, right? That sort of stuff. And vision in leadership for me was really, and for my team and the people that have used my book, is really the first vital for leaders to have. In the vision section of my book, I go through an exercise called a role map and a team vision map, which really outlines what your team does, the what, the who, and the when of all of your team's tasks and activities that you're responsible for, as well as your team's mission statement. So it really is the foundation for all the other vitals and all the other things that your team has to worry about and that you have to do to be successful. So it starts with vision, and then support obviously is the second one logically, because if you don't have the right support, and I have exercises for what's the right environment, what's the right, leadership that you should be working for in the support section. So
yeah, let's define support a little bit here so that we understand. Support is resources, support is people. What is contained in this support vital?
In the support section, all the exercises are these different areas of support. So the first is your workspace and your work environment. So I take the readers through exercises for what's your ideal workspace and work environment that you want to be working in that really fuels your best work. Another one is people. So that's really also the leadership you should be working for, the type of team, the type of culture, personalities that you want to be working with. Another is communication. So what are your primary methods of communicating with your leader or your peers at work? Do you feel the current method and frequency of communication with your leader are effective? Why or why not? Communication is such a big part of support, right? Like really starting from the foundation of team dynamics almost. And then finally, schedule. So are there certain rituals in your typical workday that you look forward to? Is there anything about your schedule you would change if you could, like commute, time you come into work, time you leave work? So all of these are really aspects of support that I go through in this section, second section.
Okay, perfect. And let me ask you further on this one. I can see that some of these are kind of work culture, like the entire company environment. Some of them are individual. Some of them are like specific to Jake or specific to whoever is on the team. And so how does that play out within this framework? Support as a framework for the whole company or as us as individuals?
It's really for the individual. So I think in this book, support, it's detailed enough that it's really, if you feel like, oh my gosh, yeah, this lack of support in this area is really holding me back. It's really about talking with your leader about first you doing these exercises, right? And getting clear on the support that you need and that would be your ideal support. And then I take the reader through also, how do you talk to your leader about gaining that support? In workplaces now, it's fortunate that a lot of workplaces are becoming more flexible as far as policies and culture, like working from home or having flexible work hours. So that's great. And I think this section of the book sort of sets people up for taking advantage of that sort of change, but keeping in mind, it's not to take advantage, right? It's to fuel your best work is really how I approach it. Like the metaphor I give in the book is a fountain cannot function without water in the reservoir, right? So if there's certain aspects of support in your team culture or your company culture or the policies that are holding you back from doing your best work for the company, a little shift there and talking with your leader about a little shift in support in these different areas could make a big difference in how productive and motivated and dedicated you are as a team member or as a leader, like a middle manager is really who I'm talking about here.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for going into that. Let's jump down. I want to talk about context a little bit as one of the 7 vitals.
So context, yeah, it's an interesting one that is actually one of my favorites because it's a big part education, and it's really the interrelated conditions in which something exists or occurs, right, is what context really is, like by definition. But in this leadership or business setting, context is really the knowledge and understanding of the overall organizations beyond your own team. So especially in office environments, a lot of time people are onboarded to the office or onboarded to the team as a leader, and they're sort of just sitting at their desk with one view of a screen, and there's 1,000 or 10,000 other people in the company that they really don't know, or they really don't know how the company is structured or set up. And what I found as a team member and a leader is without understanding the context of the company network, the other leaders in the company, the partners, third-party partners of the company, it's really hard to do your work effectively or have the end impact that you want to have. So this context section is all about setting up opportunities for new leaders and for leaders to set up opportunities for their teams to learn more about the company context. So the examples I give in my book are that when I was a logistics leader, I took my team on field trips to the distribution centers, and I took my team on field trips to the port, to see the steamships that we managed in operations.
Yeah.
And I took my team on a trip to the other home office so we could meet another team that we worked with as well. So this understanding of context actually helped my team to better understand the work they were doing in action.
I think this is so important. This is something that the leaders listening to this episode need to really take to heart. And that is, we sometimes operate with this assumption we understand, we know what people are going through, we know what context they're speaking from or delivering from. And it's when we get out of our normal routine. You talk about taking field trips, or you talk about sitting down and having these conversations, creating an opportunity to really understand the context where things are coming from. That really opens your eyes, awakens you, if you will, as a leader to what's going on, what the needs of your company are. Because I think sometimes as leaders, we operate somewhat with blinders on because we have an agenda, we have a direction. Sometimes we're moving at a high rate of speed, and it's sometimes we overlook the contextual clues or the context that our team is operating under. So I really love this conversation. Now I want to jump to the last one, and that is freedom. Now, freedom is something we all want, but it's one of your 7 vitals. And so tell me why this is so important for leaders.
It's interesting too. I get a lot of questions about it because people say, if I'm working in an organization, can I really have this freedom? Or are you saying I leave? And I'm like, no, this awake idea is that you can have freedom if you have the ability to choose where to place your awareness and how to spend your time. So just like we were talking about in context, I think why a lot of other leadership books don't have a vital like context, just to jump back there for a second, and then I'll get to freedom, is that this relates to the yoga philosophy piece, is that yoga philosophy is a lot about, and yoga practice is a lot about observation and awareness. Like I said before, the pause to see clearly before taking action. And I think a lot of business leaders today, what they don't realize a lot is we're so go, 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 action, 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 that when we don't pause to teach our team members the context, spend time going to these other facilities or spend time having them work in a store to understand the customer before doing the work, before doing the action, their action is actually less fruitful and sometimes wasteful, or it's not as productive or motivated as it could be if they had that context. And so similarly, freedom, being the ability to choose where to place your awareness and how to spend your time, is really motivating leaders to work in a company, coming full circle, where they align with the vision and the actions that they're taking in order to feel they have freedom in the work that they're doing. They're not out of alignment. They're not working against their grain or against their interests or the interests of the world, but they really do feel they have freedom. Freedom isn't sitting on a mountain alone, not having responsibility. Freedom, in our modern age, if you're interested in business, and I love business and the opportunities that it offers, freedom is having responsibility, right? But if your responsibility doesn't align with your interests and your purpose, and you don't really want to place your awareness there, or you feel like the impact isn't the impact you want to make, then you don't feel free, right? But you can feel free in any job if it's where you want to place your awareness and where you want to be spending your time.
And while you talk about this, I'm thinking about a kite, right? A kite up in the air has the freedom to move, but if you cut that string, that kite's going to come down. The only ability the kite has to kind of freely move up in the atmosphere, up in the sky as it goes around, is because it's grounded, it's hooked to that string that allows it to operate up there. And just like our leadership conversation today, freedom isn't about having no strings. Freedom is about making sure that you're in alignment with that string so that you can really have the freedom to kind of fly around and do your stuff. And I love this idea, these 7 vitals, and I love the idea that it all comes full circle. If you look in the book, you'll see that the image is drawn out such that, you start to go around in a circle and you see, we start with vision, we get to freedom, but freedom really connects back to the vision, and it's this continuous operating process. Now, process sounds very engineering to me, and so before we jump to the final section of the podcast, I wanted to ask you, Ivy League education, engineering degree, what happened to engineering? How did you get into this corporate development leadership training space?
Yeah, so I really saw in those corporate experiences that I had, both at Urban and at Restoration Hardware, that though engineering was needed while I was in college. We need engineers, and even companies today, we need engineers. Engineers are needed. What I was drawn to and pulled to, or what was digging at me while I was in this experience, was those leadership gaps, whether on operations teams or on transportation teams or design teams. I was really pulled to and found a knack for using my systems education to not necessarily design transportation systems, but to design leadership systems. So both of my books are these leadership systems that I think it's really using my systems education in a way that is interesting, because a lot of people do need these soft skills, but I also use the technical background to design some of the exercises in the book that are very practical, yet surrounded by this soulful guidance that's sort of needed in a lot of business environments today. So yes, the word process is very engineering, because it is, an iterative, if the metaphor in the book of the 7 vitals, you keep progressing around this spiral staircase of awake leadership is the process. So every time you make a round around the vitals from vision to freedom, it's like you're going up on the staircase, moving up. So it's really an iterative process of getting into more alignment with your awake leadership, so to speak, or your career and your personal and professional life.
And so for all the listeners to the podcast that may have gone down a different path with their education, those who maybe went down the path of business and are now doing something entirely different, or like yourself, went down the path of engineering and have found yourself in the leadership space, I think the lesson to pull out of this here is there's great things to take away from all your experience, whether it's directly related or just ancillarily related. And I don't think you would go back and change the fact that you're an engineering graduate.
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, these 2 books, they're both, a system for. They definitely wouldn't have been systems if I didn't have my systems engineering degree. And I think having that background in engineering helps me relate to engineers and business leaders. I did my education at Penn, both in engineering and at Wharton at the business school. But being primarily in engineering, I think it helps me to relate to engineers who are leaders and really need these books. So yes, I think everything happens for a reason, right? And yoga is the yoking or the uniting of things together. So you're able to draw these lines between things in your life that seem very separate or you may not normally connect. But when you connect those things and all of your experiences together, your really unique collection of experiences can come together into something pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely cool. It's like artwork. All right, changing gears just a little bit here. Our next section of the podcast is our Learning from Leaders, where we add a little personal to go along with this business conversation. Are you ready?
I'm all ready.
All right. Our first question then today is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table. What are you reading?
So that book is The Brand Identity Breakthrough by Gregory Deal, to be very honest. So this book is really it's a pretty new book, and it's really a deep dive into authentic brand identity. So if you're starting a business or you're an entrepreneur or you're interested in doing it eventually, I got a lot of great insights and points about developing a more human brand, but making it differentiated and powerful. So it offers a lot of really great new authentic focus points for brand development. So it's, again, similar to my books, really a book for personal growth and business in that brand development category.
And I think that's an emerging category that is very interesting to the modern leadership audience. We like this kind of marriage between the soft skills and the tactical skills of leadership. That's what we define modern leadership as, this new generation of leaders. So great recommendation or great thought of what's on your bedside table. Next question then is your leadership superpower.
That would be clarity for sure. So I am known, many people have told me that from, both my engineering background and then applying it to leadership, I'm great at stripping away complexity and, really seeing the truth and getting to the core issue and a clear solution. So I use that both in business strategy as well as in the leadership work that I do.
Very cool. Clarity is a leadership superpower I would love to develop. Our next question then is a philosophy quote or mantra, something that you live by.
That would be where focus goes, energy flows. And that's a Tony Robbins quote, but it's also very yogic, right? Where focus goes, energy flows. So that's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And, I have used different versions of that. And now that you mention it and being a Tony Robbins quote, I see the original. But I've used different versions of that a lot over the past few months as I've talked with the coaching clients that I work with, that where you put your intention, where you put your measurement, where you put your focus, where you put your energy, well, that's where opportunity is created. That's where doors open. That's where, like you say, energy flows where your focus goes. So I really love that quote. It's something that I subscribe to myself. Our final question then is the book that you most often gift to friends, family, or colleagues. What are you recommending these days?
So that book is How Can I Help by Ram Dass. I've been giving that to people probably for the last 5 years. One of my yoga teachers actually suggested it. And I thought, how can I help? And it's by Ram Dass. He's a very, spiritual guy, but I read it. And it is very, very related to business. And anyone that sort of resonates with the conversation we just had, or like you said, is interested in the integration of the soft skills and the technical side, or the personal growth and the professional growth, should really read this book. It's a book that really simplifies the complexity of giving and receiving. So when business seems so complex, this book looks at giving and receiving from a really human perspective with case studies. It's very refreshing and inspiring. And again, a book for personal growth and leadership or business.
Well, very cool. So if you're resonating with this conversation, that's a book to check out. But another thing that you can do if you're resonating with this conversation is you can take a look at Hilary and her books and her site and what she's doing. And so before we let you go, Hilary, where can we find out more about you? And is there any last bit of advice you'd love to send our way?
Yeah, so I'll start with where people can find me. My website is awakeleadershipsolutions.com. And you can find my books there. They're available on Amazon, both in print and now on Kindle. Yay for the traveling leaders and the Kindle fans. Yeah, so it's very exciting. And also, I'm on Instagram at Awake Leadership Solutions. That's where I post the most on Instagram, pretty much daily. And then also LinkedIn, you can connect or follow me, Hilary Jane Grosskopf, and also my company page, Awake Leadership Solutions. I'm on Twitter at Awake Solutions. And finally, please do besides buying my books, the other most interactive or interesting thing you could do is follow my publication on medium.com. I write at least monthly a new article for leaders on medium.com. So if you follow the Awake Leadership Solutions publication on Medium, you can find my most up-to-date new articles there.
Well, very cool. We'll link all of that up on the show notes so they can go to one place and get all of the goodness for you. But before we let you go, any last bit of advice?
I would say if you are an aspiring leader or one day would like to lead a team or have your own business, practice patience and persistence, right? So be persistent, get there, get clear on your vision, keep going, and be patient. And as I say in my Awake Ethics book, practice contentment, that the right opportunity will manifest and will partner with you when the time is right.
So PPC, we've got patience, we've got persistence, and then we have contentment.
Contentment.
PPC.
Oh, yeah, that goes along with patience. Yes, that goes along with patience. So contentment, yes, is like practicing being happy, practicing gratitude day to day. So yeah, contentment goes along with patience for sure. And then persistence in my Awake Ethics book goes along with discipline. So staying true to your vision and your mission, continuing forward with action is persistence. And then the patience part is the gratitude and the contentment and the ease along the way, right? So finding that balance. It's a very yogic balance.
Well, Hilary, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for coming on this week and being our modern leadership guest expert.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake. I really enjoyed the conversation.
All right, my friends, and a big thank you to Hilary for joining us on this episode of the podcast. You know, as we concluded, I got to pull back the curtain a little bit there. As we concluded, I had been furiously writing notes, and I looked back at my notes and I saw the PPC, patience and persistence, and I couldn't read my own handwriting. I wrote it so quickly that I couldn't. I'm looking at it right now, and I can't even tell what I wrote. Contentment. Contentment is the C of that formula there that we closed with. And I think it's hilarious. There's so much great stuff going on. I'm writing so quickly, just like you probably are as you're listening. If you didn't get everything down, if you missed something, you could always go back to the show notes for this episode. They are always found at jkcarlson.com. And this particular episode is episode 131. So you can get the show notes at jkacarlson.com/ML131. And of course, until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And I hope that we proved everything is figure outable. See you next week. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.